Loud and clear. Make sure I turn that on before I forget. And looks like we're still waiting for our speaker to arrive. See some familiar faces in there. CY and Eugenio and Nihar. Oh, here comes Keshav. Has Jeff Love entered yet? Nope, I don't think so. All right, welcome everybody. We are waiting for our guest speaker to join us. Hopefully he'll be doing that soon. If not, we'll have to follow up and see what happened because we had a lot of back and forth emails and I know he's planning on being here. But if this is your first time here, welcome. We'll get started in about 2 or 3 minutes. My name is Daniel Homlin from Good Samaritan Capital, and we have a couple of the real estate investing for busy professionals leaders in the room here. Maybe we can go around in just a moment. Actually, we're still getting a lot of people coming into the waiting room, and I'm admitting them.
Is there some way to just like automatically admit them, or do we want to admit them one by one?
Well, Zoom said that I could either put a username and password over it, which a lot of people had problems with last week, or I could enable a waiting room. And so it seemed like the waiting room was the lesser of two evils, but we're still trying to figure this out.
Yeah.
Next week we'll be not only on Zoom, but live on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. If you've just joined us, can you make sure that you mute yourself? And maybe Priya, are you able to do that, or Keshav?
No, we're not the host yet, Daniel. Could you make me?
Oh, okay. Let's see. I lose the waiting room if I make you the host.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Hey, yeah, I am doing better. For those of you who were here last week, I'm recovering from COVID. I'm about 12 days in. I'm feeling a lot better today. So thankfully, it seems to me, you can still kind of hear it in my voice, and I'll mute myself to cough every once in a while. Is Jeff Love, our guest speaker, here?
I am.
Excellent. There he is. All right. Well, since he's here, we're still getting people rolling in. Let's just kick it off and say that you've reached the Real Estate Investing for Busy Professionals live meeting. We have this meeting every week, Thursday at 3 p.m. Pacific time, and we're glad you're here. No matter which group you're from, I see a lot of people here that are from the Real Estate Education Club that I run at Intel, but I know that the Apple group, the Amazon group, the Netflix group were also invited. So I'm actually kind of curious. Let's get the chat room going here a little bit. If you are from the Intel Club, can you just type 1 into the chat? Let us know. 1. Hi, Bob, Jason, Shay, Katie, Amy. Wow, we've got a lot here. Okay. If you're here from the Apple Club, put a 2 in. And there's no order. I did not mean that to be an order of importance at all. No, just kidding. No, nobody from Apple here, huh? Okay. What about Amazon? Amazon, give us a 3.
Advertise yet. So.
Oh, you didn't put it out?
No.
Whoa, maybe this is an Intel group then. Is there anybody here that's not from Intel? Put a 4. No one from Netflix either. Okay. Well then, 4. Eugene Cartwright. I know that name. You're not from the Intel group? Okay. All right. Oh, you were from the Intel group. Okay. All right. Well, we're glad you're all here. My name's Daniel Homland. This REI for Pro, or real estate investing for busy professionals, is a network of investors. We all have busy jobs. We all have busy lives. But this is here to give real estate advice to you, the busy individual that's got a full-time career. And Priya and Keshav here are also leaders on our team. All three of us have full-time jobs. Actually, all three of us are in the tech space. But we invest in real estate while holding down our full-time jobs. And we run this live event as an educational group so that you can learn to do that too. And you can increase your financial and real estate education. If you want to find out more about my company, I have a multifamily acquisition firm called Good Samaritan Capital. You can find it at goodsamaritancapital.com. And why don't we go and have Priya introduce herself, and then Keshav.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for making the time to attend this event today. Like Daniel said, in addition to our full-time jobs, we also take the time to educate ourselves and learn about real estate. So far, right now my focus has been in multifamily, and in the last few years, I've invested both passively and actively into multifamily apartments in Texas and Georgia. So far, we are close to 500
Jaime.
units.
So, oh, sure.
I think someone is off mute. Okay, now they're muted. Oh, yeah, no, that's all was my introduction. So, and I would also be moderating some of the Q&A today, because after Jeff is done with his initial presentation, similar to last time, we want to make this session more of a Q&A and discussion oriented. So with that, I'll pass it on to Keshav.
Thanks, Priya. I am a software engineer as well at Meta, based here in New York. My firm's name is Clav Capital, rather new. I've invested in Texas so far, looking to invest in more in the Southeast as well, and help run these projects. So I run the commercial real estate club at Amazon with the help of other Amazonians, and I might start one at Facebook or Meta. So just helping other techies get into real estate, and join the group here so that next time people can actually respond with something other than one. And that's it for me. And I hope you guys enjoy what we put together here. And thanks for joining us today, Jeff.
All right. And we want to make sure that you guys have the topics in here that you're interested in. We're going to be focusing a lot on short-term rentals, rental properties, and multifamily and other asset classes. But of course, it's also important to focus on how do you set up a estate for your heirs? How do you protect yourself legally? What are the different challenges that are involved in just running a business? And so if you are interested in any of those topics, let us know. We're focused on those that I just mentioned, at least initially, but we can go in other directions. And so let me introduce our guest here. We have Jeff Love. Jeff, we have not met each other. I'm glad to meet you. We were set up together by Matt Four, who works over at Dell. And I understand that you've been on Matt's podcast, Ice Cream with Investors. But today you're going to come and talk to us about legally protecting yourself when you're doing real estate investment.
I am. And Matt did introduce us. It's great to meet you and happy to be here to talk to you guys.
All right, so we'll turn it over to you, and you can give a whatever presentation or short talk, and then we'll just open it up to questions and dialogue.
Great. Are you able to put those slides up, or should I do it on my end?
I can do it. It might take me a moment.
Okay.
If you have it available, you can do it.
Okay. 1 second. I can share my screen. Okay. Let me just pull it up right now.
Go for it. I can put it up on the screen if you need me to as well.
Just got it.
All right.
Okay. Did I do that okay? Everyone can see it?
Everyone could see it. And feel free to put your questions in the chat. Oh, I need to be admitting people to the waiting room. We have 30 people in the waiting room. And Priya and Keisha and myself will help moderate it, and we'll judiciously interrupt you, Jeff, in order to bring those questions out.
Okay. So I'll start giving you all my kind of 60-second introduction about who I am and why I'm speaking to you today. I am a partner in about 40-person law firm. We're based in Southern California and Nevada, where I practice in real estate and corporate transactional work. So I help busy real estate investors, developers, entrepreneurs with real estate and corporate transactions, from buying real estate, doing their due diligence, raising capital, negotiating loan documents, really anything from acquisitions to dispositions, including kind of syndication and a real specialty in multifamily across the country. So what I want to talk to you guys today about is what I call the 5 W's of asset protection: the who, what, when, where, and why. And this is more important than ever nowadays, especially in multifamily, because you don't want to put your other assets at risk,
Got the phone
especially.
number for the HELOC, but they're closed. His name is
I'll
Jesus.
try and mute people as they are here. And if you're there, can you please put yourself on mute?
Not a problem. Especially if you're a busy professional and real estate isn't your day job, you want to make sure that you're protecting your other assets and not putting those at risk with a passive or active real estate investment. So let's go ahead and get into the slides. I'm going to start with the who. Who should incorporate and organize, whether that's an LLC, a partnership, any type of limited liability entity. And the short answer is really anyone that wants to protect their assets. You could be a doctor, an accountant, a tech professional, an attorney. If I'm worried about liability, I want to organize as an LLC, a partnership, or some other type of limited liability vehicle, so I'm not putting all of my assets at risk. A short example of why this is important and a real life story: client owns a 4-unit apartment building. I don't think there's anyone here from Amazon today, so I'll pick on Amazon, which was the actual delivery company. But Amazon delivery employee walked up to deliver a package, slipped, fell, and broke their neck. Lawsuit comes against the property owner. Property owner does not have adequate insurance, and they own the property in their own name, and they have significant claim against them. Ended up having not so pretty a result because they weren't protected. They didn't have any type of vehicle in place, so the claim by the injured delivery man went against all of the client's assets. That is why any person, if you're running a business, whether it's real estate or passive, active, you want to make sure that you are protected. And there are many different entities, there are different ways that you can do to protect yourself. The why is very similar to the who. The number one reason why someone's going to organize, say, an LLC, is you want the limited liability protection. When you create an LLC, it is a separate business, just like Amazon, Meta, Intel. You and the business, you and the LLC, you are separate, legally distinct entities. So if that LLC is sued because of a slip and fall, because of a tenant, a lender, they are suing the company. The assets that you have at risk are only the assets owned by the LLC. So if you have a single family rental that you use as, say, an Airbnb, and you're sued, the only asset that's at risk is that rental, any bank accounts, anything owned by the company. But if you personally have retirement accounts, stock options, RSUs, anything that you own in your day job, your home, your car, that is not at risk. And that's the number one reason why you'd want to create a limited liability company, a partnership, if you are going to invest in real estate and there's liability associated with that. And I know there's a lot of interest in multifamily. Unfortunately, that is one of the asset classes that have the most risk just from normal day-to-day claims, because you have coming and goings of delivery personnel, mail, family, friends that are visiting someone's home. You have other risks in other asset classes. There may be environmental risks with warehouse, with retail, you have customers, but just the comings and goings of multifamily and the fact that you may have a large apartment building with 10, 20, 50 units, it amplifies the risk. Some of the other quick benefits of why you should incorporate is you have a very flexible tax structure. You can have it be a pass-through entity, just as if you were a sole proprietorship. If there was a need to, you could have it be taxed just like a corporation. You're able to deduct certain expenses where you may not be able to as a sole proprietor. Check with your accountant if it's something that you do decide to organize, because there are real and tangible tax benefits to organizing an entity. The other two are kind of maybe lesser known or not talked about as much, but one is privacy. Depending on the state that you're in, if you're owning an asset in your own name, or you're in a car accident and you have a plaintiff's attorney that's looking to come after you for assets, if you own real estate in your own name, any plaintiff's attorney can easily do a search and find out what you own. But if you own the real estate through an LLC, especially in a state that helps you maintain privacy, it can be much harder to find. And while a good attorney can end up finding what you own, it makes the process hard. It makes the process a little bit more difficult for them. And it just gives you that added privacy that you're not advertising to the world that you are the sole owner of this real estate, and make you a plaintiff, really a defendant that a plaintiff's attorney would be worth pursuing. And the last one I'll talk about is credibility. And that really comes into play, when you're dealing with a lender or you're dealing with investors. Maybe you're trying to raise capital to buy a syndicate or buy a larger apartment building, and you're not really able to do that as yourself. If I come to you and say, I'm Jeff Love, will you come invest in my project? It doesn't have the same ring to it as if it's, Love Capital, and I have the company, I have the credibility, I've set myself up as an entity where my investors have limited liability protection. And it really starts you off when you are dealing with investors, like I said, lenders, service providers, that this is really a legitimate business venture separate and apart from the sponsor or the individual.
Jeff, I think there are some questions coming in. I'll just open with a couple if that's okay.
Of course.
So is there any threshold as to when it makes sense for you to have an LLC? Is it, even if you own one single family home, is that something you should consider? Or is there a certain level of investment? Say you have a significant number of single family homes and some passive investment, is that going to be the threshold to have an LLC, or even otherwise it would make sense, even if it is as low as a couple of single family homes?
That is my when slide, but I'll give you the quick answer now is whenever you think there'll be liability. Usually your single family residence that you live in, you're not going to put it into an entity because you can lose some of the interest deductions and write-offs that you would. It also can make it harder to get a loan because not all lenders are going to lend to an entity, especially if it's your single family residence. It's a consumer loan. But when you start getting into investing, and you may have a duplex or you may have a rental, and there's a potential that a tenant could have a claim against you for something, that you have a recourse loan, that there are deliveries being made, and you have significant assets that you want to protect, that's when it makes sense to start thinking about incorporating or organizing your business. Because the short answer is you want to think about organizing an LLC or a partnership when you have an asset and you want to protect yourself against different liabilities.
No, that makes sense. Can you also talk a little bit about how, because I'm sure there are several people who are passively invested in multifamily. Say you're a passive investor in multifamily, right? is that, and there are several of my investors who are also may benefit from this question, is in that case, based on what you're saying, if that multifamily property, if there is, if someone like files a claim, are the passive investors liable too if they are not protected through LLC?
I get that question a lot, and it's a very good question. Typically, the answer is no. I wouldn't organize if you are a passive investor. If the sponsor who you've invested with has created the company properly and is abiding by all the regulations. So if Priya was to create a investment vehicle and all of us were to invest with her, we typically would have limited liability protection. Apart from us suing each other or suing the manager, we're protected from those third-party claims. But if Priya, as the manager, I'm sorry to pick on you, but if you were to commingle assets, or you were to not maintain the corporate formalities, and there was an accident and the LLC got sued, and they were able to pierce the corporate veil, which is our legal saying of that a plaintiff is able to get around the shield or the barrier of the LLC and come after the members, then you could have personal liability. So if you are not going to protect yourself and have a limited liability entity yourself, you want to be extra diligent that whoever you're investing with on a passive scale is maintaining all of those formalities and making sure that the LLC that you're a member of or the partnership you're a partner of was created correctly, because you do have potential to have liability if it wasn't. So I do have a lot of clients that even when they're investing passively, they may have a simple holding company that all their passive investments are made through, just in case, because for them, they have enough assets that they want to protect and enough exposure to liability that it's worth creating that single entity as a just in case.
Mike has a really good question here. He wants to know about, can we have liability protection through insurance, property insurance, or an umbrella coverage policy instead of establishing an LLC? And I'll add, what is the balance and trade-off?
That is another terrific question that I have spoken at on a different event, kind of at a panel, attorney versus insurance broker. And the shorter answer to that is insurance, you never want to go without. There's no substitute for insurance. You can protect yourself through an adequate insurance policy, whether it's casualty insurance, it's liability, more likely liability insurance, an umbrella policy, which I strongly recommend. But the caveat there is, are there exclusions to the policy that you don't know about? Is the amount of coverage enough? Given where we've been these last couple of years, I can't tell you how many restaurant clients that I've had that didn't know their policies didn't include pandemic coverage. They thought they were protected with insurance, and lo and behold, they have no coverage. I've had clients that have a $1 million insurance policy, maybe 2 million in the aggregate, and there's a severe accident, something happens, someone gets hurt, and it's a $5 million claim. You had insurance, but it wasn't enough. So the answer is yes, insurance can cover you if you have enough and you're comfortable. The LLC can protect you in the sense that your other assets are not at risk, just the assets owned by this company. But if you really want to protect what you have, there's no substitute for having both. Have the liability insurance, have the umbrella policy, and create the LLC. So worst case, if they got, if the insurance was not enough, the asset that is at risk is the real estate. Because I really want to protect my retirement, I want to protect my home, cars, everything that I've built. So I'm not willing to take that risk, especially for what can be, in the grand scheme of things, a nominal premium for that insurance policy and the amount of money that it takes to set up an LLC.
Do you want to ask a question, Priya, or should I go to the next one?
Go ahead.
Okay. A lot of people here are asking about, should I be creating the LLC before I buy the property, or if I already have a property, what are the steps to go about putting it into an LLC?
So I'm going to click right here to when. And on this, so you really want to create an LLC when you think you're going to need that asset protection. If you already have a property, it's never too late. You can, in many states, you can transfer real estate over to an LLC, not be hit with any type of reassessment or transfer taxes, and you're protected going forward. Now, that wouldn't protect you, personally if an accident occurred prior to when you moved the title to the property over to the LLC, but it would protect you going forward. I tend to recommend clients create the entity before you're going to buy the asset so that you're protected from day one. But it's never too late. They're easy to create and set up. And the overarching, I guess, advice would be you want to create it before you incur the liability, because once you do, then you've opened that box and you've exposed yourself and all your assets, if you've owned it in your own name or a trust, before the incident occurs.
What are some of the steps that it actually, like, on a concrete level? How do you open the LLC and then move the property into it? What are the logistics there?
So I'll run you through the example in California where I am. So the first thing you do with an LLC is, so we want to think of the name. What are we going to call this LLC? We are going to figure out who's going to be our registered agent, who is the person that would receive summons, complaint if we're ever sued. I usually use a business address, so it's not our home. It's not, because that can often be public record. And you're going to file what's called the articles of organization. Some states like Delaware, it's called a certificate of formation, and that's our operating document with the applicable Secretary of State, where we create an LLC. Once we create the LLC, we'll usually get a taxpayer ID number with the IRS, and it's really that simple. We've created it. Most banks, lenders, you're going to want to create an operating agreement, which is really the governing document of this company, especially if you have partners. And that talks about how you're distributing profits and losses, who's managing the company. Is it a manager managed, which is kind of like a board of directors, or is it member managed? And that's more like your stockholders running the company. And once you've actually created the LLC, it's filed an active company with the state. To move a property in it, all you're going to do is have your local attorney or professional, or yourself, if you feel qualified, to prepare the deed where the property would go from your name, and you would deed it over to the name of the LLC, file it with the county recorder, you pay the applicable taxes. And once it's filed, you've actually moved the property, the title to the property, over to that LLC.
Do you have another question, Priya?
We have a few. So where did you stop, Daniel? Whose question did you ask last? There's a huge line.
Oh,
of
I
questions
combined
asked.
several of them, but several people are asking about trusts right now. And if you have a property in a trust, should you put it in an LLC?
When you have it in a trust, and excluding land trust for the moment, which are different, but if you have it in a family trust, all you're really doing there, that is for estate planning purposes. You are going to avoid probate, avoid public records, and your asset is going to pass according to the terms of your trust to your beneficiaries. But a trust does not offer you any type of liability protection. Whatever's owned by that trust is really open for creditors. Now, if the trust only owned the real estate, you have more protection there than if the trust owned all of your assets. But it's not the same type of liability protection. Whereas if you were going to create an LLC, because the LLC is a limited liability entity, just like a limited partnership, where only those assets that are owned by that company are at risk. You're suing the LLC and not the individual. Whereas you're suing a trust, you're suing the trust in everything the trust owns. So if that's your family trust and you have your personal residence, retirement accounts in that trust for estate planning purposes, it's not giving you that liability protection, because a creditor can go after anything that trust owns and anything your beneficiaries are entitled to.
So then you keep it separate, or you sort of include the LLC in, no, I'm not going to complete that sentence. So how do you then organize it, Jeff?
What you could do, and for estate planning purposes, your trust could own the equity of your LLC. So you have 123 Main Street LLC that the trust is the member of. Now, the liability protection is still there, because if we sue 123 Main Street, we're suing the assets that are owned by 123 Main Street. So I'm suing, we're going after those assets, which is the real estate. I don't get to go after the trust because the trust is the member, but the equity of the LLC would still pass in accordance with the terms of the trust to your beneficiaries. So a lot of times you will see an LLC created and the sole member may be maybe a family trust. You may have individuals, and that's more on the estate planning front than just the real estate or asset protection front.
Hopefully that answers Eugenio's question as well, because I think what was being asked is, if an LLC has a single member or trust entity, does that mean all assets in the trust is at risk? But based on how you explained it, I think that takes care of this.
Yes, they would not be at risk because the trust is the member, not the actual title holder of the property. So the trust assets are not at risk, just the LLC.
Okay, so the next question is, what factors should you use to decide if you should pay off your current mortgage before you create an LLC and invest in another property for passive income?
One of the things you want to consider is whether your lender will allow you to transfer the property to an LLC. A lot of times with loan documents, there are due on sale or due on transfer clauses where if you transfer the property, the loan can become due. And most of the time with smaller properties, single family, duplex, triplex, quads, kind of the consumer portion of real estate, 4 units and below, it's usually not a concern. But when you get into commercial loans, that's a much more enforceable provision from a lender. So if your lender won't allow you to transfer the property, that may be your answer, and that you do need to pay off the loan before you're transferring the property, or at least have that conversation with your lender before you do so and inadvertently trigger a clause that accelerates all of the debt. But it's a good question, and especially when you're in the smaller, 1-2 unit properties, you do want to talk to, if you plan on having debt, you do want to talk to the lenders as well, because there are many out there that do not care if you own a real estate in an LLC, but there are lenders that do, and every now and then you'll get a better rate if you are an individual. So it's something to consider when you weigh the pros and cons of creating an LLC, at least at the outset, and see whether you're able to get the loan and then move the real estate over to an entity in the future.
Kaushika's got an interesting question here. It's kind of the reverse of the trust question. He's asking, if I have a property in a living trust, can I move it to an LLC? And I think I'll even follow that up with saying, does the LLC have some of the inheritance and estate planning aspects that a trust would have? How could you replace your trust with an LLC?
They are not. So they are different. On the trust side, we're talking about more estate planning. We don't want to go to a probate. We want to make sure our assets are going to our heirs or whoever we decide are our beneficiaries. We're leaving it to charity, leaving it to children, family members. That's what our trust is really designed for. And when we pass away, if something's owned by our trust, it automatically will transfer to our beneficiaries through the nature of the trust. An LLC, or any entity for that matter, is not an estate planning vehicle. It's a business. And one of the benefits of that business is liability protection, but it doesn't have an estate planning component. So if Dan's the member, Dan owns that company, but there's no component that says it's going to go to his heirs or to charity upon his death. If you combine the two, that's how you get that result. So you have the LLC or the partnership for the liability protection, and it's owned by your trust, which has your estate planning component. So upon a death, the equity of that LLC, the ownership, would pass to the beneficiaries of the trust without having to go through probate. So it's a very good question, but it's you need to incorporate both of those aspects to get that desired result.
We have a question here about types of deeds. And the question is, which is best, a quick claim deed or a warranty deed? And maybe the question could be refined to what's the difference between the two?
The difference between the two, and it depends on your state, because in California, we have a quick claim deed and a grant deed. And many other states, you'll see a special warranty deed. You can see a warranty deed or a quick claim deed. The real difference is a quick claim deed, you're granting whatever you have. There's no representations or warranties whatsoever. If I own the property, I'm transferring it via this deed. If for some reason there's a defect in title or I don't own it, I haven't transferred it. But a grant deed or a warranty deed, that's our all-encompassing deed. I'm really representing that I own the property, that I am granting you title to this piece of land, whether I represent that I own it or not. It's the all-encompassing deed. So when you're buying property from a third party, you're really looking for that grant deed or warranty deed. If you are transferring property to your own LLC, that's more often when you'll see a quick claim deed, because you already know that you own it. Really, this only comes into play when you're dealing with third parties, and that's when you'll see the different types of deeds. When I have clients transfer property to an investment vehicle like an LLC, more often than not, that's the case when we'll use a quick claim deed.
All right. In terms of exposure to this is an interesting question. In terms of exposure to liabilities, is there any difference between a second home and an investment home?
There is not. Doesn't matter how many you own. When we're talking about liability, it's really what type of claim is out there. Now, in plaintiff can, they can slip and fall on your personal residence. They can slip and fall on investment property. The only greater exposure is the more properties you have. If you have a personal residence and an investment home, then you're amplifying that risk, because someone can be cutting your grass on multiple properties and something happens. But in terms of just your blanket exposure, the type of property that it is not going to increase liability. It's more, do I have many tenants because it's an investment property and I've got 4 units, or I have a single family residence? The 4 units probably has more exposure because I've got 4 times the amount of tenants, 4 times the amount of people coming and going, different packages, different cars coming into and out of the property.
So the next question, this is interesting too, and there are a few similar questions in this theme. So if you have an LLC not tied to your asset, can you tie the asset to the LLC, or the LLC needs to be registered for mortgage purposes?
Not sure that I understand the question when they say tie the asset to the LLC.
I think they have an asset which is not tied to an LLC. So it looks like they have an asset and they have an LLC, and both are separate. And I think they're asking about
Got it.
is that what you were going for, Termi Topi? But there is a similar question down below as well. How do I move the mortgage from my personal name to the LLC? Will lenders agree to it, which is what you touched on briefly earlier?
If the lender's in agreement, then it's the simple process that we just need the deed from you, if you're holding the asset, to the LLC, and that will move the property over from you as an individual into the LLC as the business. So the big caveat there is you want to make sure that if you do have debt on the property, that the lender consents to the change, or there's not a due on sale, a due on transfer provision inside of your loan documents. But otherwise, it's a simple process. You're really moving title to that property over to the LLC. And even if the LLC is already created and you already own the property, you can always move title from one entity or person to another.
Just to throw this out there too, though, I think lenders can be very cautious about transferring the mortgage itself to the LLC. And tell me, if I'm wrong about anything here, but I usually see commercial loans, tied to properties in LLCs, but oftentimes lenders will want a personal guarantee on any mortgages on single units or rental properties. So I don't know. Do you see a lot of mortgages being moved into the LLC, or are they mainly personally guaranteed?
It really depends on the type of property we're talking about. When we talk about commercial property, when it's 5 or more units, you do see a lot more personal guarantees. And it depends on the type of loan, whether it's a recourse with guarantee or it's a non-recourse loan. And that dictates some of the financial terms that you'll see. With residential loans, those 1 to 4 units, you don't often see personal guarantees, even if it's made in the name of an individual, because the lender has underwritten the property as the real asset. So your personal family residence, lender's not going to be able to come after you for any shortfall or in a foreclosure for any deficiency judgment. They're coming after the real estate. So even if you owned it in the LLC and you moved it over, the lender's still in the same financial position. I see a lot of clients, they just go ahead and they move the real estate over without even talking to their lender. And 99% of the time, there's no problem. Certainly don't recommend it. I always talk to the lender and make sure that it's acceptable. And most of the time it is, because again, they've underwritten the real estate rather than you as the individual. It's a different type of story when you're talking about a commercial loan, when they make it to an entity, because they may have underwritten you as a guarantor, and that's part of the underwriting process to make sure that the lender is financially secured. So it really is a case-by-case basis, but I also really look in that distinction between commercial and residential loans when we're talking about transferring properties.
Okay. So just to put everything together, Jeff, that you were talking about earlier on, looks like if you have to think about LLC and trust altogether, it looks like keeping your investments in the LLC, having your LLC be a member of the trust be a member of the LLC is kind of at a high level, an approach that we should consider or think about.
Yes, definitely, because the LLC gives you that liability protection and the trust gives you that estate planning. And if you combine the two, now you've got both. Many times you see an LLC with individual as a member, but that's just because they haven't brought in the estate planning component. If it's just, even if you're investing as a passive investment, you could hold that in your trust, or you can have your LLC holding company with your trust. If you have a family trust, a living trust. If you don't, you can certainly hold the interest in those investments in your individual name, but if you don't have a will, if you haven't decided where your assets are going to go upon death, then it would go through the probate process. And that's part of the benefit of a trust, is it avoids that.
Someone's probably unmuted. So another easy question, is it easy to move assets from one LLC, say California, to another established in, say, Arizona?
You can reincorporate or reorganize an LLC in other states. And that actually goes along great with this next slide is where am I forming this company? And that's one of the most important questions when you are creating an LLC. There are 50 states, and they all have their own LLC statutes, but they aren't all created equal. Most of the time, you will see, especially for real estate investments, you will see an LLC created in the state where the property is located. And the reason for that is many states, if you're doing business there, they require you to register your LLC. So if I was going to create my LLC in the state of Delaware, because it's a very pro-business state, most of our Fortune 500 companies are incorporated there, I still have to register my LLC in California. So I'm not avoiding any of the franchise taxes. I'm not avoiding any of the California requirements. I've just duplicated them because now I've got to comply with Delaware and I've got to comply with California. But I certainly can take my Arizona LLC and reorganize it in California if I wanted to and get rid of the Arizona requirements. Or I could qualify it to do business in California and the LLC is allowed to do business in both states. But one of the questions I get most often is where should I organize it? And you may hear a lot about Delaware, you'll hear about Nevada, Wyoming, New Mexico. And some of those states, they have low filing fees. Nevada gives you the ability to remain, much more confidential, much more private than California, because you don't have to disclose as much information. New Mexico is probably the most private state in the nation now. All you do is you file your articles. There's no annual report. There's no disclosure requirements. So if there's a need to maintain that confidentiality, Wyoming and New Mexico are two of the best states to do it. But the big caveat is if I'm going to go buy a rental property in California, I still need to qualify my company to do business there. So a lot of the benefits that I was hoping to get by organizing in New Mexico or Wyoming, I've now been extinguished by having to qualify to do business in California. So it is a case-by-case question, but you will hear a lot about organizing in these states, and they certainly do have benefits, whether it's lower filing fees, helping you maintain privacy, a much more business climate, no state income tax. But if you own property in other states, you need to weigh that against where I'm creating this company, or I may be paying filing fees on taxes in multiple states.
There's a question about series LLCs, and is it a good idea for an investor to set up a spoken hub model using a series LLC?
It can be. Many states, California included, don't recognize series LLCs. So if you were to create one in Texas and you were buying property in California, you don't really get the benefit of a series LLC. And what that is you create one LLC, and we'll call it the parent LLC, and you can create children LLC. So you may have one parent and 5 children, and each child is its separate entity for liability purposes. So if you had 5 properties, the idea is I'm only paying taxes on one entity, I'm only paying to file one entity, but all 5 have their own liability protection, and I'm not commingling all the assets. That works, but it again depends on the state that you're in. Because if you were to take that Texas series LLC for your 5 properties, but your 5 properties are in California, California is still going to require you to pay franchise taxes on 5 LLCs because they don't recognize the series. So the benefit of that is saving costs, is actually not saving you anything. And a lot of times the series LLCs are more expensive to set up. So it depends on where your property is located and what you're going to use that for. It could be very valuable depending on where you are and the goal for that series LLC, but you have to really look into it because, again, if you're buying property in California, it's not going to have the desired effect.
There's a question about if I have a property in an LLC, what happens to it from an inheritance perspective if I pass away?
That is a good question. Goes back to what we were talking about with the trust. If you own a property in the LLC and you pass away, the equity in that LLC, the ownership would pass according to your will if you have one. If you don't, that it's going to go through the probate process where they try to find your heirs and divide the asset accordingly. But if you own the LLC in your trust, it's going to automatically pass according to the language of the trust into your beneficiaries. So that's really the benefit of combining the two. And that's the same with any other asset, your home, your car, your retirement accounts, whatever assets you have that we're trying to protect. If you don't have a will or a trust, they're all going to go through the probate process. So as important as our real estate asset protection talk is, if you haven't spoken with an estate planning attorney, I highly recommend that, especially if you've got assets to protect, because you don't want to go through you want everything to be devised according to your wishes, real estate or otherwise.
All right. Matthew is asking, what's the difference between an S Corp and an LLC? And what are the pros or cons for a single member LLC or S Corp, if that exists?
Another great question. And again, perfect timing with the next slide. So I'll add S Corp there. An S Corp is just a corporation. What it is a subchapter S Corporation. And what that means is pass-through taxation. So our normal corporation, like Amazon, Intel, you are paying a second layer of corporate tax. The corporation is paying tax on its profits, and then it's distributing money through dividends to its shareholders, who will then pay their own personal tax. When you create an S Corp, or you elect for that subchapter S, you remove that second layer of taxation. So there's no more corporate level tax. The profit passes through to the shareholders or members, and they are paying tax based on their personal tax rates. It's the same type of pass-through that you'll get in an LLC or a limited partnership. And that's one of the main reasons, we don't often hold real estate as just a regular C corporation, because we don't want to pay that second level of tax. So an S corporation, and one of the benefits too with an LLC is you can also be taxed as an S corporation. You don't have to actually be a corporation. You can make that election to be taxed as an S corporation. And the real difference with an subchapter S election is you can pay yourself a reasonable salary. So we'll give an example. We are going to have an LLC. We're going to own a 10-unit apartment building, and we're going to actively manage it and pay ourselves a salary of $50,000 a year. I only have to pay my self-employment taxes on that $50,000, as long as that's a reasonable salary. All of the rest of my profit, I don't have to pay self-employment tax. So I'm saving myself 15.3% in taxes on that extra income. Where if I'm just an LLC, and I don't make that election, all of my profits and losses, I'm paying my self-employment tax on. But you need to be actively involved in the business to make that S election, because you're going to pay yourself a salary. So that's a good question for your accountant when you are creating one of these entities, if it makes sense and you're able to make an S election. But with an S election, there are limitations. You have to be a US citizen. You cannot be an entity. And there's limitations on the types of owners and trusts that can be owners of an S corporation. It's also limited to 100 owners. So if you had a very big company, you were syndicating real estate, you had 150 owners, you wouldn't be able to make that S election because you have too many shareholders or members.
Atul here has got an interesting question. If the LLC is owned, I'm sorry, if a property is owned by an LLC and it's passed through a trust, does having that property in the LLC mean that we lose the step up in basis that's often given to people that inherit property?
You can. That is a great question. And one of the downfalls to an LLC is typically when you own property in an LLC, your heirs do not get a step up in basis on death. So that's one of the trade-offs, the liability protection versus that step up in basis. So you often see, if you are older, you may take the property out of the LLC and either gift it to heirs, or upon death, allow them to get that step up in basis, because that is more valuable than the liability protection. But if you are in your 30s or 40s, we may be more worried about liability protection than we are about death and passing it to our heirs. That was a big topic of conversation these last 12 months when the administration was talking about getting rid of the step up in basis or modifying it, and what that would do to the entities and how people hold real estate and other assets.
So
And go ahead, Priya.
from a strategy perspective, Jeff, then in order to like benefit from the step up in basis, is it possible to like, remove your assets from the LLC and put it back into your, I mean, all this is just a theoretical question, but is it possible to remove it from the LLC, put it into your trust so you can still get best of both worlds?
It is, and we see that a lot where you may own real estate for several decades and you own it in an LLC or maybe a partnership, and you reach the age where you're now more worried about leaving assets to heirs, where you take it out of the LLC and you put it back in your own name and you make sure you're adequately insured because you bought that property for $1 million and now it's worth $10 million, and you want to make sure that your children get that step up in basis.
This wasn't a question that was asked, but I think there might be people that are interested in this. Are there any limitations on LLC use for people that are H-1B visa holders?
They're not. An LLC is very flexible. You don't have to be, even a U.S. citizen. You can be all foreign owners. And that's one of the benefits of that entity versus the subchapter S corporation that we talked about, where you actually have to be a U.S. citizen to be a member of that. So that's the most often we will see real estate entities be an LLC or a limited partnership, which each have kind of their pros and cons, but just because of their flexibility of ownership, that anyone can be owners, it's much more easy to allocate profits and losses. For example, in a corporation, if you own 25%, you're required to get 25% of the profits and losses. But if Dan, Priya, and I were all members of an LLC, and Dan and Priya said, we're doing all the work, we each want 40%, and Jeff, you get 20%. We could do that in terms of profit and losses, but we could be a third in terms of voting. So it gives you that flexibility to be able to allocate profits and losses different than ownership percentages in an LLC or a limited partnership. You see both of those a lot, but those are the two most common entities that we see investment real estate being held in.
Daniel, you're on mute.
All right, thank you, Priya. I said we're almost at the top of the hour here, and Jeff, I see your contact information is up, but if you want to tell us anything about your firm and your practice and what you do for people, go right ahead.
Sure. I love answering questions. This was great. So if anyone has questions, feel free to reach out to me. My email is jlove@gibbsgideon.com. And again, I help clients with real estate transactions, structuring investments, buying and selling real estate, dealing with loans, and also have a specialty in syndicating real estate. So helping those sponsors raise money from investors and buy investment real estate across the country.
All right. And everybody, we will be back next Thursday at 3 o'clock. If you'd like to join some of the discussion, we do have a Facebook group, which is not terribly active right now, but we're going to start posting these videos there fairly soon. And we hope that you'll join us over at Facebook, or potentially if you're interested in syndication, we have a LinkedIn group as well. So we hope to see you there and see you next week. Jeff, thank you so much for being on. Could everybody take themselves off mute and thank Jeff for coming in?
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Jeff.
you.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jeff, for coming in.
Yeah.
That was
Thank you.
awesome.
I'm sorry, I did have one question. Can you mention your email one more time, Jeff?
Sure. It's jlove@gibbsgideon.com.
Thanks a lot.
All right. Have a good day, everyone.